For the past year, I have been studying tirelessly for my exams at the mercy of my lecturers and professors. Through my times of misery, I've devised a secret plan. A plan to subject my subjects to the same evaluation that I've undergone, so they can feel my pain. Welcome to the evaluation pit, where we evaluate subjects instead of them evaluating us. My name is Ryan Ong and I'll be your host for today. So on my right, I have the subjects that I took for semester 1, and on my left, I have the subjects that I studied for semester 2. So without further ado, let's get right into it. During semester 1, I studied a total of 6 subjects: Virology, Integument Immunity, Epidemiology, Parasitology A, Veterinary Professional Practice 1, and Locomotion. So the workload definitely went up significantly this semester 1 because I only studied about 4 subjects per semester in DVM year 1. As such, I really struggled to adapt to the new workload and I ended up not doing as well as I hoped to do. I had classes every single day, with most classes ending at 5:30 p.m. each day. And we had mid-semester exams as well, starting from week 4 and continuing all the way to week 11. So we would have our exams on Monday every week. On top of that, I spent a lot of time in the lab as well, developing my scientific skills. We had to do a group project where we evaluated a scientific paper as well before presenting it to the lecturers. So enough of me talking, let's get into the subjects. Number 1, Parasitology A. So the first half of this subject was relatively straightforward, as the parasites that we studied had different features and as a result were pretty easy to remember. So we actually studied about fleas, ticks, and mites during the first half of this semester. The second half of the semester, however, was really difficult for me because we learned about the different types of worms that could infect animals. Problem was, the worms all looked the same to me, and as such, I struggled to remember them and I had difficulty diagnosing the right parasite that was infecting an animal, and therefore I got the treatment wrong. As such, I didn't do very well for this subject. It was cool to learn about the different types of drugs that was used to treat these parasites though, and I believe that I will learn more about them next year, which will really help me cement the concepts. Because I didn't do well for this subject, my opinion on this would be pretty biased, and I will rate this subject a D grade. D for destroyed, literally how I felt after I sat for the final paper. The next subject would be Virology. So these consisted of weekly labs that were really fast-paced, and as such, I found it really difficult to keep up with what was being covered in the labs. So if you are a pre-vet student, I would highly recommend you to attend as many lab classes as you can and perhaps spend more time in the lab so you can develop your scientific skills and lab skills, which will really help you once you start vet school. However, I found out that I had a deep interest in the different viruses that were out there, and this really helped me do well in the end. For example, coronaviruses like to infect cells that rapidly divide. And one region of the body that has cells that rapidly divide would be the small intestine. More specifically, the cells lining the surfaces of your small intestine. And as such, because these viruses affect these cells, what would happen would be that absorption would be affected, leading to clinical signs like diarrhea and abdominal discomfort. Because of my deep interest in this particular subject, I would give it an A grade. Partly because I did well as well for this subject, so it's a little bit biased. Next subject would be Locomotion. So as its name implies, you learn all about the parts of the body that plays a role in movement. So that would include your muscles and your skeletal system. So during the course of this subject, I learned how to interpret radiographs that had fractures in them, and I thought this was really cool because I could directly see the relevance of what I was actually studying. On top of that, we learned about the different types of bone diseases as well. One of them being osteosarcoma, which is a form of cancer that affects the bone. We learned about this really short and simple phrase to help us diagnose osteosarcomas in the future. That phrase being away from the elbow and towards the knee. We had a particular case study where we learned about what happens when an animal experiences a cruciate ligament rupture, as well as the surgical procedure that is used to treat it, which I thought was really fun. Other case studies were pretty fun as well, but other than that, this subject sadly didn't leave much of an impression on me, so I would rate it a C grade. Next would be Veterinary Professional Practice 1. So this is a pretty broad subject in the sense that they covered multiple different types of content, ranging from how to communicate better to things like the regional anatomy of a dog, which actually formed a large component of this subject. So under the regional anatomy of a dog component, you actually learn in specific detail about the anatomy of a dog. Classes for this particular component consisted of 8-hour weekly lab sessions that were split into 2 sessions per week. So that would be 4 hours per lab session. And before every lab session, we had to do a series of pre-readings as well to help us prepare better for the class. So initially, when I studied this subject, I really struggled with trying to remember what I was reading, as well as trying to piece certain anatomical components to their particular exact locations on a dog's body. On top of that, I found out through this subject that my spatial awareness was pretty poor as well, because these subjects' assessments include them showing us pictures of certain regions of a dog's dissected body, and we had to identify from that picture alone the name of a particular nerve, blood vessel, muscle or bone, just by looking at the orientation of that photo and also the anatomical components that were surrounding the primary anatomical component that we had to identify. And because my spatial awareness was pretty poor, it took me a really long time to identify what that particular thing was. Thankfully, this subject was only graded on a pass-fail basis, and I managed to pass. One more thing I would like to add is that for this subject, prior to our dissection classes, we would have a short clinical skills segment as well, where we were allowed to practice certain clinical skills on the cadaver. For instance, we actually learned how to intubate a dog during one of these classes, which I thought was really helpful, and it actually motivated me to study harder for this subject. So overall, I will rate this subject a B. Next would be Epidemiology. For a large part of my life, I've spent it avoiding math as if it's the plague. However, math seems to really love me in return and has followed me all the way to vet school in the form of epidemiology. So although epidemiology is vet related in the sense that we study the prevalence of diseases as well as how well diagnostic tests were at identifying certain types of diseases, I really struggled with this subject still because at the end of the day, math was involved and I'm bad at math. I ended up just passing this subject, but I'm so glad that it's over. Unfortunately, because of my biased viewpoint against math, I would rate this subject an E. So the last subject of semester 1 of DVM 2 that I studied would be Integument and Immunity. So I thought this subject was really fun because we actually learned more about how to interpret certain diagnostic tests. One of them being how to read your complete blood count. We learned how to identify if a dog is experiencing an inflammatory response, is experiencing something called a stress response, and more. I thought this was really cool because I felt as if I was finally studying vet stuff, if you know what I mean. Like, we finally were learning things that were being used on a daily basis. The topic is pretty content heavy, but because I did my Anki cards earlier on, I managed to score pretty well for this subject. So if you're doing vet, I would recommend you to do your Anki cards early and consistently throughout the semester. This was one of my favorite subjects as well, and as such, I would rate it an A alongside Virology. So moving on to semester 2 on my left here. In this semester, we did a total of 7 subjects. Although the number of subjects that I studied went up, the workload somehow felt lighter, and I managed to manage my time more wisely this semester. So the 7 subjects that I studied were Veterinary Public Health, Veterinary Professional Practice 2, Animal Production Systems, Bacteriology, Reproduction, Parasitology B, and Nervous System. The first subject of semester 2 that I would like to cover is Nervous System. So this was actually my favorite subject this semester. And during the course of studying this subject, we actually learned about the different brain structures and functions, as well as the 12 cranial nerves. I thought it was really cool because when I was studying this subject, I felt as if the brain was like this huge motherboard, and that the cranial nerves were like circuits that were radiating out of it and towards it. And together they work to allow the body to perform its various functions. Furthermore, we learned about the different reflexes as well. And one really interesting thing that I thought was really fun was that we can actually use these reflexes to identify certain regions along the spinal cord or in the brain that has a particular issue. So one really fun case study that I did was a case study on a Dachshund that jumped off a couch and as a result experienced a slip disc. So during the case study, we had to actually look at the different reflexes that were carried out during the physical examination to guess where along the spine the slip disc was located before doing imaging to identify the exact location of the slip disc. I had loads of fun studying for this subject, even though it was really content heavy, and I really felt like a detective trying to find the culprit through the little hints that they left behind at a particular crime scene as I was studying for this subject. So with that, I would give this subject an S grade, way above A grade subjects like Virology and Integument and Immunity. Next would be Parasitology B. So this is part 2 of Parasitology, and honestly, the way the subject was being carried out was the same as what was done in semester 1. However, the parasites that I learned in this subject were more distinct, and as such, I ended up doing better compared to semester 1 because I found it easier to remember the different parasites, their life cycle, and how to treat them. So examples of some of the parasites that I learned during this subject were tapeworms, flukes, also Toxocara canis, also Giardia, and more. So because this subject unfortunately did not leave me with much of an impression, I'm going to have to give it a C grade. Next would be Veterinary Public Health. So as its name implies, we learn about public health things. For example, the different types of zoonotic diseases that were out there. We also learned public health content that were related to the vet industry as well. Some of them being food safety, what happens in an abattoir, and also the different diets that are out there and how to ensure sustainable consumption. So I found the zoonotic part of this course to be really interesting because we had this really big workshop where all of us gathered together as a cohort, and together we actually brainstormed the different zoonotic diseases that infected each animal species. So this collective brainstorming session was actually really intellectually stimulating, and I actually really had fun with it. This zoonotic workshop was really helpful in helping me cement concepts and knowledge that I've gained from other subjects such as virology and also bacteriology, which I will cover later on. So that really helped me do well in subjects such as bacteriology later on. Also, learning more about what happens in an abattoir actually pushed me towards a more vegetable-friendly diet this year as well. My meat consumption has gone down and the amount of vegetables that I'm consuming has gone up. So with that, I would rate this subject a B grade because I saw the relevance of this subject in today's world, and I saw how vets played an important role in ensuring human health as well. The next subject would be reproduction. So when I first studied this subject, I really struggled with remembering the different hormones that contributed to the estrous cycle. However, once I really got down to it, once I really memorized all of these hormones, I actually found this subject to be much easier because at the end of the day, many of the new concepts that I was learning were tied to these particular hormones. One defining moment that happened to me during this subject was when I was actually given the opportunity to perform a rectal examination on a cow. So when you think about vet school, chances are you will imagine a vet student putting their hands into a cow's anus, and that was precisely what I did. So you have to do that in order to identify if a cow is pregnant, and if it is pregnant, what stage of pregnancy it's at. So it was really eye-opening for me in the sense that I had to be able to see a cow's pregnancy status just by using my sense of touch alone. So with that, I will rate this subject a B grade. A B grade because although this subject was really fun, I didn't really have that much of an interest in it. Next subject would be bacteriology. So this was hands down one of my favorite subjects this semester as well. So during this semester, we actually had case studies as well, 40 case studies in total. So at first glance, it may seem like a lot, but our lecturers were pretty empathetic and they actually gave us numerous deadlines throughout the semester to ensure that we were doing a few case studies at a time. And because of that, we managed to complete all of them at the end of the semester. Doing these case studies actually really helped cement the concepts that I've learned in this subject, and it contributed to me doing well for this subject at the end. On top of that, we had a practical assessment as well, where we were given 2 culture plates, clinical history, and also a list of possible bacterial agents that could cause those particular clinical signs. And based on the culture clinical history alone, we had to carry out some primary tests before creating a list of differential diagnoses. The list of differential diagnoses being a list of bacteria that could potentially be the agent behind the disease. So once we have that list, we had to order some secondary tests to help narrow it down to just one bacteria that was causing the disease. So again, it felt like detective work, and I really enjoyed doing that, even if it was during assessment conditions. With that, I would give this subject an A grade as well. Oh, one more thing. During this subject, we also learned about the different antibiotics that are out there, as well as a rating system that is being used nowadays to help tackle antimicrobial resistance. So the rating system ranges from low importance to moderate importance to high importance. So if an antibiotic is high importance, then that would mean that we can only prescribe it under exceptional conditions. So we'll probably have to culture the bacteria first, and if that bacteria is resistant to all of the other antibiotics, including those of low importance and moderate importance, then we will only in that situation prescribe high importance antibiotics. This is because if we were to prescribe high importance antibiotics recklessly, then if antimicrobial resistance against that were to develop, then we would pretty much be screwed. And the animal, or perhaps a human, may end up dying from these superbugs, as we call them. The next subject that we will cover is animal production systems. So I don't think I've mentioned this before, but in year 1, we actually learn about the different animal industries that are out there and what happens within these industries. So for example, we actually learn more about the management calendar of beef and dairy industries and what actually happens behind the scenes. We also learn about really interesting industries like the bee industry and how certain problems such as the rise of the Varroa destructor is actually threatening these industries. So in semester 2 of year 2, we actually study these industries again, but this time round in more detail. So essentially, we were building on what we were learning in DVM 1. So I thought this subject was pretty cool in the sense that I could see how the knowledge that I was gaining in vet school could be applied in these specific industries. As such, this really motivated me to study harder for my other subjects because I could see the relevance of what I was learning. With that, I would rate this subject a C. Because sadly, even though I saw the relevance of what I was studying, some of the content was not that interesting to me. The last subject in semester 2 that I studied is Veterinary Professional Practice 2. So this subject was pretty similar to what I did in semester 2, and yeah, we had a regional anatomy of the dog component as well. However, we studied different regions compared to what we studied in semester 1. Because the content covered was pretty similar, I would assign this subject perhaps a C for, pass. And with that, we have covered all of the subjects that I've studied this semester, a total of 13 subjects. So when I started year 2, I felt really intimidated because of the sheer number of subjects that I had to cover. But somehow, I did it, one small step at a time. So there you have it, this year's subject evaluation, and hopefully I'll be able to post more videos in the future, and I'll see you soon. Peace.